The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of Willow Creek's only hotel, kicking up dust that swirled in the late afternoon sunlight. 26-year-old Levi Zimmerman stood with his hat in his hands, his throat suddenly dry as paper. The advertisement he'd placed 6 months ago in the Eastern newspaper had finally borne fruit, though not exactly as he'd expected. The letters they'd exchanged had mentioned nothing about a child. Tessa Holloway stepped carefully down from the coach, her face partially hidden by a modest bonnet. In her arms, wrapped tightly in a blue blanket despite the warm May weather of 1878, was a small bundle that moved slightly as she adjusted her hold. A baby. His mail-order bride had arrived with a baby in her arms, and Levi's well-rehearsed greeting died on his lips. "Mr. Zimmerman." She asked, her voice soft but steady as she approached. Her eyes were the color of prairie grass after rain, and despite his shock, Levi noticed they held no apology, only cautious hope. "Yes, madam, I'm Levi." He cleared his throat, painfully aware of the curious glances from townsfolk gathering on the boardwalk. "Welcome to Willow Creek. This is Emma," Tessa said, shifting the blanket to reveal a sleeping infant with wispy blonde hair. "She's 4 months old. I understand if this changes things." Levi looked from the baby to the woman who'd traveled over 1,000 miles based on the promise of his letters. Tessa's chin was raised, but he could see the slight tremble in her hands as she held her daughter. Behind her resolute expression lurked the fear of rejection, of being stranded in a strange town with a baby and nowhere to go. Without thinking further, Levi stepped forward, set his hat atop his head, and in one fluid motion lifted both Tessa and her baby into his arms. "It's nearly sundown," he said, his voice gentler than he'd intended. "Let's get you both home." The look of stunned relief on Tessa's face made something shift inside his chest as he carried them to his wagon. Home. The word had never meant much to Levi until that moment. The journey to Levi's ranch was quiet save for the creak of wagon wheels and occasional soft noises from baby Emma. Tessa sat stiffly beside him, her posture betraying her uncertainty despite his welcoming gesture. "Your ranch is far from town?" She finally asked, breaking the silence as they followed a winding dirt road that led away from Willow Creek. "About 5 miles, Levi replied, guiding the horses around a bend. "Not too far if you need supplies, but far enough to have peace." He glanced at her profile, noting her exhaustion. "I've prepared the house best I could. It's not fancy, but it's solid. Built it myself 3 years ago." Tessa nodded, adjusting Emma, who had begun to stir. "In your letters, you mentioned expanding the cattle operation. Is that still your plan?" "Yes, madam. Got 40 head now. Hoping for 80 by next spring." Levi paused, then added, "I've saved enough to make improvements to the house too. Figured a wife might want her own touches." The word wife hung between them. They were to be married tomorrow by the town preacher according to their arrangement, but the presence of Emma had changed the equation. "Mr. Zimmerman, Levi, please." "Levi," Tessa corrected herself. "I should explain about Emma. I wasn't dishonest in my letters, but I wasn't forthcoming either." "You don't owe me explanations today," Levi said, surprising himself. "You've traveled far, rest first, we can talk tomorrow." Tessa studied his profile. Most men would have turned us away at the station. Levi kept his eyes on the road ahead. "I'm not most men, Miss Holloway." The ranch came into view just as the sun began to set, painting the modest homestead in golden light. The main house was simple but sturdy, with a covered porch and smoke rising from the chimney. A barn stood nearby, along with a corral where several horses grazed. Fields stretched beyond, and in the distance, cattle dotted the landscape. "My neighbor's wife, Martha, came by earlier to light the stove and prepare something for supper," Levi explained as he helped Tessa down from the wagon. Emma had awakened and was regarding the new surroundings with wide, curious eyes. "It's lovely," Tessa said, and there was genuine appreciation in her voice. After the cramped tenement in Boston where she'd been living, this open space with its endless sky felt like breathing for the first time. Levi carried Tessa's trunk inside while she followed with Emma. The interior was simple but clean. A main room served as both kitchen and living area with a solid wooden table, a cook stove, and two comfortable-looking chairs before the fireplace. Doors led to what Tessa presumed were bedrooms. "Your room is there," Levi said, gesturing to a door on the right. "Mine's across. The door at the back leads to a washroom. Had it built last year, pumps in there so you don't have to go outside for water." Tessa's surprise must have shown on her face, for Levi added, "My mother always said a house without indoor water isn't fit for a lady." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Levi said simply, and Tessa noted the past tense. "I'll bring in the rest of your things." Martha left stew on the stove. Tessa carried Emma into the bedroom. A bed with a fresh quilt stood against one wall, a dresser against another. A rocking chair sat in the corner near a window that overlooked the eastern pasture. On the dresser was a small vase containing wildflowers, a thoughtful touch that brought unexpected tears to Tessa's eyes. She laid Emma on the bed and quickly arranged a nest of blankets to keep her from rolling. The baby gurgled, kicking her legs in freedom after the long journey. "What do you think, little one?" Tessa whispered. "Could this be our home?" Emma's answer was a tiny yawn that made Tessa smile for the first time that day. Supper was a quiet affair, with Levi asking polite questions about Tessa's journey west. He seemed determined not to pry into her past or the circumstances that had brought her and Emma to his doorstep. Tessa appreciated his restraint, though she knew the conversation couldn't be postponed indefinitely. After the meal, when Emma was fed and sleeping in a drawer Levi had quickly converted into a makeshift cradle, Tessa took a deep breath and sat across from him at the table. "I need to tell you about Emma," she began. Levi looked up from his coffee. "Only if you want to, I do." Tessa folded her hands in her lap. "Emma isn't my daughter by birth. She's my sister's child." Levi's expression remained neutral, encouraging her to continue. "My sister Margaret died in childbirth this past January. Her husband had been killed in a factory accident 2 months before." Tessa's voice remained steady, though the pain was still fresh. There was no one else to take Emma. The alternatives were unthinkable: an orphanage or worse. "I'm sorry for your losses," Levi said sincerely. "When I answered your advertisement, I was desperate. I couldn't support us both in Boston on a seamstress's wages, not properly." Tessa met his gaze directly. "I intended to tell you about Emma before we arrived, but I was afraid you would rescind your offer. Then we would have had nowhere to go." Levi was quiet for a long moment. "Do you regret coming here?" "No," Tessa answered without hesitation. "I made a choice to give Emma a chance at a better life. I don't regret that." "What about yourself? What do you want?" Tessa, the question startled her. Few people had ever asked what she wanted. "Safety," she finally said. "A place where Emma can grow up healthy, work that has meaning." She hesitated before adding, "Perhaps in time something more between us than an arrangement of convenience, if that's possible." Levi's expression softened. "I think that's possible." He stood and took their cups to the wash basin. "The preacher expects us at noon tomorrow, but if you need more time or if you've changed your mind—" "I haven't changed my mind," Tessa said quickly. "Unless you have." "No, madam," Levi replied, a slight smile touching his lips. "I made a promise. I intend to keep it." That night, Tessa lay awake listening to Emma's soft breathing. Through the walls, she could hear Levi moving about his room, a stranger who would be her husband tomorrow. A man who had lifted her and Emma into his arms without hesitation when many would have turned them away. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a beginning, and for now that was enough. The wedding was a simple affair at the small church in Willow Creek. Martha Wilson, the neighbor's wife who had prepared their first meal, held Emma during the ceremony and beamed with approval. The preacher, Reverend Collins, kept the service brief, as if sensing the couple's discomfort with being the center of attention. When Levi slipped a plain gold band onto Tessa's finger, a ring that had belonged to his mother, he told her quietly the reality of her new life settled upon her. She was now Mrs. Zimmerman, a rancher's wife, 1,000 miles from everything she had known. "You look beautiful," Levi said as they left the church, and though Tessa knew her traveling dress was far from elegant, his sincerity made her cheeks warm. Back at the ranch, Levi surprised her by producing a wedding gift, a cradle he had crafted himself in the days before her arrival. I've been working on it since I got your last letter, he admitted, running a hand along the smooth wooden edge. Thought we might need it someday. Didn't expect it would be so soon, but I'm glad it's ready for Emma. Tessa was touched beyond words. It's perfect, she managed, fighting back tears as she placed Emma in her new bed. The baby immediately began exploring her expanded territory, tiny hands grasping at the sides. I have something for you too, Tessa said, retrieving a package from her trunk. Inside was a quilt she had made during the long winter evenings in Boston. It's not much, but it's more than I've had in a long time, Levi said, his fingers tracing the careful stitching. Thank you. That night, they retired to separate rooms, the understanding between them that their marriage would develop at its own pace. Tessa was grateful for Levi's patience, for his willingness to give her time to adjust to her new role and surroundings. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Tessa learned the routines of ranch life, making the house truly her own. Levi taught her about caring for the chickens and the vegetable garden that had been neglected since he'd lost his mother 3 years before. In turn, Tessa introduced new recipes and comforts that transformed the bachelor homestead into a family home. Emma thrived in the fresh air, growing stronger each day. Levi was awkward with her at first, watching from a distance as Tessa cared for the baby. But one evening, when Tessa was busy with supper preparations, Emma began to fuss in her cradle. Before Tessa could dry her hands, Levi had crossed the room and carefully lifted the infant. There now, little one, he said, his deep voice softening as he held her against his chest. Your mama's busy making us something good to eat. Let's not disturb her. Tessa paused, overwhelmed by the sight of this strong man holding the tiny girl with such tenderness. More surprising was his natural use of the word mama in reference to her. It felt right somehow, as if they were truly becoming a family, but the fragile peace of their new life was disrupted 6 weeks after Tessa's arrival. Levi returned from a trip to town with troubling news. There was a telegram at the general store, he said, his expression grim as he removed his hat. Someone's been asking about you and Emma in Boston, a man named Harold Fletcher. Tessa paled. Margaret's father-in-law, who is he to you? Nothing. To Emma, he's her paternal grandfather, but he showed no interest in her after James died. Tessa's hands trembled slightly as she set down the shirt she'd been mending. He blamed Margaret for his son's death, said she distracted him from his work. He was cruel to her at the funeral. Levi's jaw tightened. The telegram said he's hired someone to find you, says he has rights to his son's child. He has no rights, Tessa said fiercely. Margaret named me as Emma's guardian in her will. There were witnesses. Do you have documentation? Tessa nodded, going to her trunk where she kept her most important possessions. I have a copy of the will and a letter from the lawyer confirming my guardianship. Levi took the papers, examining them carefully. These seem legal, but I'm no expert. We should consult Judge Wilson next time we're in town. Do you think Fletcher could take her? Tessa asked, unable to keep the fear from her voice. Not without a fight, Levi said firmly. Emma is our daughter now, our daughter. The words warmed Tessa even as worry gnawed at her. Levi had never formally adopted Emma, but his claim on her was clear in his eyes. In the weeks they'd been together, he'd gone from awkward distance to genuine affection for the baby, often taking her with him on his morning rounds of the property, proudly showing her the animals and telling her about the ranch she would one day inherit. The next day, they traveled to town to speak with Judge Wilson, who confirmed that Tessa's guardianship papers were in order, but advised them to formalize Levi's role as Emma's adoptive father. The process would take time, but it would strengthen their position should Harold Fletcher pursue his claim. As they left the judge's office, Tessa spotted a stranger watching them from across the street, a man in a city suit who seemed out of place in Willow Creek. When he noticed her attention, he quickly turned away, but Tessa felt a chill of premonition. That man is watching us, she whispered to Levi, who casually glanced in the indicated direction. Probably just passing through, he said, but his hand moved protectively to the small of Tessa's back as they walked to their wagon. That night, after Emma was asleep, Tessa joined Levi on the porch where he sat watching the stars emerge. Over the past weeks, these quiet evening moments had become precious to them, both a time to talk about their days, their pasts, their hopes for the future. Slowly, their arranged marriage was blossoming into something more genuine, built on mutual respect and growing affection. "I'm afraid, Levi," Tessa admitted, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "What if Fletcher tries to take Emma? He won't succeed," Levi assured her, his voice steady. "I've been thinking about this all day. If necessary, we could leave, start fresh somewhere Fletcher couldn't find us." "You would do that, leave everything you've built here," in a heartbeat. His certainty surprised even himself. "This land matters to me, Tessa, but you and Emma matter more." Tessa felt tears spring to her eyes. "When did that happen?" she asked softly. Levi was quiet for a long moment. "I think it happened the moment I lifted you both into my arms at the stagecoach. I just didn't recognize it until now." He reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. It was the first time he had initiated such contact, and Tessa's heart quickened at his touch. "I know this isn't how either of us imagined finding a spouse," he continued, his voice low. "But I'm grateful every day that you answered my advertisement, even if your letter left out one small detail." Tessa laughed softly through her tears. "A 4-month-old isn't exactly a small detail, Levi." "No," he agreed, smiling. "She's the biggest blessing I never knew to ask for, just like her mother." The word hung between them, charged with new meaning. Tessa had become Emma's mother in every way that mattered, just as Levi was becoming her father. And in caring for Emma together, they were finding their way to each other. That night, when Tessa kissed him for the first time, it felt like the most natural progression of what had been building between them, not passion, not yet, but a steady flame of affection that promised to grow stronger with time. 3 days later, their newfound happiness was threatened when the stranger Tessa had spotted in town appeared at their ranch. He introduced himself as Daniel Porter, a private investigator hired by Harold Fletcher to locate Emma. "Mr. Fletcher is prepared to compensate you generously for the child," Porter said, standing uncomfortably in their living room as Levi and Tessa faced him united. "He believes his granddaughter belongs with family." "She is with family," Levi said firmly, one arm around Tessa's shoulders. "My wife is her legal guardian, and I am in the process of adopting her formally. Emma is our daughter." Porter shifted his weight. "Mr. Fletcher anticipated your resistance. He's willing to take this to court if necessary. He's a wealthy man with influential connections." "And we have the law on our side," Tessa countered, finding strength in Levi's solid presence beside her. "I have my sisters will naming me guardian. Fletcher showed no interest in Emma until now. Why the sudden concern?" Porter had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I believe his wife recently passed. He's alone and wishes to connect with his only remaining family. Or he's realized that his son's child might be useful to him in some way," Tessa said bitterly, remembering the calculating man who had made Margaret's life difficult even before James's death. "Either way, Emma stays with us." "I'll relay your position," Porter said, reaching for his hat. "But I should warn you, Mr. Fletcher isn't a man who accepts defeat easily." After Porter left, Tessa paced the floor while Emma napped, unaware of the storm gathering around her. "We need to leave," she said urgently. "Tonight, before he can return with legal papers or Tessa." Levi caught her hands, stilling her frantic movement. "Running will make us look guilty. We have the law on our side, remember? Judge Wilson assured us of that. Legal battles take time and money, neither of which we have in abundance," Tessa argued. "Fletcher could drag this out for years, and even if we win in the end, the stress and uncertainty would be terrible for Emma." Levi considered her words. "What if there's another way? A compromise that protects Emma while respecting Fletcher's connection to her?" "What kind of compromise?" "We invite him here," Levi suggested. "Let him meet Emma, see how happy and healthy she is. Offer him visitation rights as her grandfather, provided he legally acknowledges our parentage." Tessa was skeptical. "You don't know Harold Fletcher. He's not a reasonable man." "People can surprise you," Levi said gently. "He's lost his son and his wife. Maybe he genuinely wants a relationship with his granddaughter. Wouldn't Margaret want Emma to know her father's family?" The question gave Tessa pause. Margaret had loved James deeply, despite his father's disapproval of their marriage. She would have wanted Emma to know her paternal heritage. One meeting, Tessa finally agreed, but I won't let him take her, Levi. I promised Margaret I would raise her daughter, and I intend to keep that promise. We'll raise her together, Levi assured her. That's a promise I'm making to you both. The meeting was arranged for the following week. Harold Fletcher arrived on the morning train, a distinguished man in his 60s whose stern countenance softened visibly when he first laid eyes on Emma playing on a blanket in the Zimmermans' living room. She has James's eyes, he said quietly, and for the first time, Tessa saw grief rather than calculation in his expression. The conversation that followed was tense but productive. Fletcher admitted that he had reacted poorly after his son's death, blaming Margaret in his grief. His wife's recent passing had forced him to reconsider his legacy and his remaining family connections. I don't want to take Emma from you, he finally said, surprising Tessa. I can see she's well cared for here, but I would like to know my granddaughter, to have some place in her life. Relief washed over Tessa. That was always a possibility, Mr. Fletcher. Emma deserves to know her father's family. With Judge Wilson's help, they drafted an agreement that respected Levi and Tessa's parental rights, while establishing regular correspondence and occasional visits between Emma and her grandfather. Fletcher would return to Boston, but with the understanding that he was welcome at the Zimmerman Ranch whenever he wished to see his granddaughter. This is more than I hoped for, Fletcher admitted as he prepared to leave. Thank you for your generosity, especially considering my initial approach. Emma is the one who matters, Levi said, extending his hand to the older man. She deserves all the love available to her. As they watched Fletcher's carriage disappear down the road, Tessa leaned against Levi, exhaustion and relief mingling with a new sense of security. You were right, she conceded. People can surprise you. Levi smiled, pulling her closer. I've been surprising myself lately. Never thought I'd be a husband and father within the span of 2 months. Are you happy with how things turned out? Tessa asked, suddenly needing reassurance. In answer, Levi turned her to face him fully. Tessa Zimmerman, the day you stepped off that stagecoach with Emma in your arms was the luckiest day of my life. I didn't know it then, but I was meeting my family for the first time. He kissed her then, a kiss full of promise and growing love. Behind them, Emma babbled happily from her blanket, a sound that had become the heartbeat of their home. The seasons changed, and with them, the small family grew stronger in their bonds. By Emma's first birthday, she was taking wobbly steps across the porch while Levi and Tessa watched proudly. Harold Fletcher visited for the celebration, bringing gifts and stories about James that Tessa carefully recorded in a journal for Emma to read someday. In the fall of 1879, Tessa discovered she was expecting a child of her own. The news filled Levi with a joy that spilled over into everything he did. He expanded the house, adding a proper nursery adjacent to their bedroom, which they now shared as husband and wife in every sense. The awkwardness of their arranged beginning had given way to genuine partnership and deep affection. Do you ever regret answering my advertisement? Levi asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emma asleep inside after an exhausting day of toddler adventures. Tessa considered the question, her hand resting on her growing belly. Not for a moment, though I do regret not being honest about Emma from the start. If you had been, Levi mused, I might have been too afraid to agree, and that would have been the greatest mistake of my life. So my deception was fortunate, let's call it divine providence, Levi suggested with a smile. Some things are meant to be even if the path getting there isn't straightforward. When their son was born the following spring, they named him James, honoring the memory of Emma's father. Harold Fletcher wept when he received the news, his letters to them growing warmer and more frequent as time passed. As the years went by, the Zimmerman Ranch prospered. Levi's cattle business expanded, and Tessa started a small side business selling her preserves and baked goods in town. Emma grew into a lively child with her mother Margaret's artistic talent and her adoptive father's steady determination. She and James were joined by another brother and sister in the years that followed, filling the once quiet ranch house with laughter and occasional chaos. On their 10th anniversary, Levi presented Tessa with a locket containing miniature portraits of their 4 children. As she admired the gift in the light of the setting sun, Levi wrapped his arms around her from behind. "When you stepped off that stagecoach with Emma, I had no idea what I was getting myself into," he murmured against her ear, having second thoughts after all these years. Tessa teased, leaning back against his chest. "Only gratitude," Levi replied. "That day when I lifted you both into my arms, I said I was taking you home, but the truth is, you and Emma brought home to me." Tessa turned in his embrace to face him. A decade of ranch life had etched new lines around his eyes and silver threaded through his dark hair at the temples. To her, he had never been more handsome. "I love you, Levi Zimmerman," she said simply. "Thank you for giving us a home." "I love you too, Mrs. Zimmerman," he answered, sealing the words with a kiss as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky. Above them stretched the same endless western horizon that had witnessed their beginning 2 strangers joined by circumstance, now bound forever by choice and love. And as their children called them inside for the anniversary celebration the older ones had secretly prepared, Tessa reflected that their story had unfolded nothing like the romantic novels she'd read as a girl. It had been better real, challenging at times, but ultimately more rewarding than any fiction could capture. Their love had been built day by day, choice by choice, through seasons of plenty and seasons of hardship. It had grown from the solid foundation of that first moment when a lonely rancher had lifted a desperate woman and her baby into his arms and called it home.